In these problems, you need to determine whether to reject or not reject the null hypothesis. Now, in questions 13 through 16, we're going to use the classical method where we compare the test statistic and the critical value, and in 17 and 18, we use the p-value method, which is what you'll be using on the hypothesis tests on your exams. So let's start with number 13. Let's see, we have a right tail test, and our test statistic is 2.07, and we have a critical value of 2.05. So what I will do is draw a sketch of what's going on. So the critical value determines the rejection region. So that's at 2.05. And what we're going to do is reject the null hypothesis if the test statistic falls anywhere in this red area from 2.05 into the tail. And where does our test statistic fall? It falls at 2.07, which would be a little bit further into the tail, because we know that the center is 0. So since 2.07 is in the rejection region, we reject the null hypothesis. And that's number 13. So now let's try number 14. Here we have a two-tail test. So when I draw my distribution, I have two critical values, plus and minus 1.64. So I'll put one at negative 1.64 and one at positive 1.64. And let's see, where is my test statistic? I shade my rejection regions first. There we go. Shading isn't really all that important. You just need to be able to see, does the test statistic fall further into the tail or is it closer to the center? So in this case, our test statistic is negative 1.55, which would be maybe about here. So that is not in the rejection region. So our conclusion is do not reject the null hypothesis. Because we're saying that negative 1.55, maybe it's not right at the center, but it's not far enough into the tail to have us determine that there's a significant difference between this value and the value that we're testing in the null hypothesis. Okay, so that's number 14. So now let's take a look at number 15. In 15, we have that the alternate hypothesis is that p is not equal to 0.06. So this tells me again that I have a two-tail test, and I should have, in the critical value, I should have had plus or minus 2.33, just like in the last one we had plus or minus 1.64. So my critical values are negative 2.33 and positive 2.33. Here's my rejection areas. All right, and where's the test statistic? Negative 1.98. So that falls maybe about here. And again, do not reject the null hypothesis because we're not falling into that rejection region. All right, so one more, number 16. And that is a left tail test, we can see, because p is less than 0.75. So the values in 15 and 16, these values really have nothing to do with the problem. The whole thing here is that I'm trying to tell you what kind of test it is. So a two-tail test or a left tail test. In this case, we're doing a left tail test. And our critical value is negative 2.58, and so rejection area, and test statistic is -3, so that's going to fall further in here, and now we will reject the null hypothesis for that one. So let's do 17 and 18 as well. All right, 17. Now in these, it's a lot easier, and I don't really bother drawing the distribution. I have P is equal to 0.37, alpha is equal to 0.01, and P is larger than alpha. So when P is larger, then you do not reject the null hypothesis. And that's the end of that one. In 18, our p-value is 0.02, alpha is 0.05, alpha is larger, so we reject the null hypothesis. And that's all there is to 17 and 18.